Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen and members. Welcome to the Planning Committee. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded, and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premise must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. We move to agenda item 1, appointment of substitute.
There are no substitutes, Chair.
Thank you, Margaret. Declarations of interest. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. On item 9, Powell Harbour Precision, I'm related to one of the, I don't think there's any connection whatsoever, but just for absolute security, and having had the advice of your very draconian legal advisor, I'm not going to take part in that item.
Thank you for that. Any more declarations?
Chair, thank you. Yeah, I called in the application, the Cove Gardens application, as ward councillor due to the high level of interest and the location of the property, and previous planning decisions around this area are very sensitive, and I was just keen for us to be, very open with that. But as far as I know, I'm still fine to be here and vote because I've not predetermined, and I will look at the application as we go through. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move to minutes, of which there is a large tome. We had the meeting of the 9th. I will go through them page by page. Page 1, any issues? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. I shall sign those. And then on to the 16th of December meeting. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, and 31. Possibly the longest set of minutes in my 8 years on planning. For the benefit of the public, it was so long because there are multiple applications on that meeting for signage on traffic islands, and each one of them had to be determined individually. You could all buy us some biscuits or... Okay, thank you for that. Public participation.
There's none, Chair.
And public representation, of which we have quite a significant amount. The agenda will be run on the basis of items 7 and 8 are first on the agenda. There will be a single presentation from the officer, and then persons wishing to speak, and I'll call you to the table at the appropriate time. We've got objectors and the agent. We will then move to item 11, Cove Gardens, and we have a speaker on that. We will then move to 12, the Feathers, and we have a speaker on that. And then we will pick up the balance of the agenda, 9 and 10. Yeah. The other issue I have just been reminded of, we also need to agree agenda item 4, Conservation Advisory Minutes. Are we content? Thank you. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year. So we'll start with application on the agenda item 7. This is 21-00-667 FUL for the University of Worcester, and as mentioned by the Chair, to avoid confusion and any conflating of issues, because the two are very closely related, we will also deal with agenda item 8 in my presentation, which is 21/00-629, which relates to infrastructure in and around the University of Worcester campus. Sorry, next slide. So we'll start with the cricket centre. Next slide, please. So the red line shows the boundary of the application site, and the blue line shows the extent of ownership or land within the interest of the university on the Severn campus. Next slide, please. This is the application proposals, the site plan. You will see a building to the north. That at the moment is an indicative ambition of the university. At the moment, it is not obviously subject to consideration. Next slide, please. This is an image of the site plan, the floor plan, sorry. And again, next slide, please. And this is the bits that have a first floor element, so a viewing platform in relation to that, so you can watch over the cricket nets themselves. Next slide, please. This shows the roof plan, and again, you will see a rectangle in the middle of the site. That is an enclosed plant area, purposely designed so it will obviously have an acoustic element to reduce noise and disturbance from any plant or equipment. Next slide, please. So the next slide shows sections through the site. Members may recall that the properties of Hardwick Close and Rectory Gardens sit to the rear, up an embankment. Again, this shows the relationship. The nearest distance between, as set out in the report, between Hardwick Close and the cricket centre is just over 24.5 metres. Next slide, please. This shows just again the front view of the application proposals, again with the properties behind, and you can see the elevated position of properties behind. Again, I've got some site photos in a moment. Next slide, please. And again, this shows how, again, those the sections through the building. So again, shows where the ground floor is and where the first floor is, and obviously a roof void as well, and obviously how the plant machinery works. Next slide, please. And as is common now with major applications, you can get some CGIs and 3D visuals. This is an approach as roughly where BBC Hereford and Worcester is from that building there. Next slide, please. Again, another view of the entrance. Again, this shows the infrastructure elements that we'll come into, but again, in front of the application proposals. Next slide, please. And again, a slide showing roughly where, how this relates to the city centre and other properties in the St John's campus, and obviously other university properties. The next slide is, so as members may be aware, there used to be some industrial factories and buildings on there. At the moment, those buildings have been demolished. This is obviously showing Rectory Gardens and Hardwick Close. And again, you can see the changes in levels there. Next slide, please. Again, this is looking across the site. And again, you can see the foundations of the old building and the current palisade fencing, which is about 2.4 metres high. And again, Hardwick Close there in the background as well. And this again just shows Hardwick Close and behind, again, roughly where those shrubs are was the position of a proposed emergency access, but that has been removed now from the application proposals for infrastructure. So I'll quickly move on to the next slide, please. And this is the application for the infrastructure applications. So next slide, please. Again, the red line of the application site runs across the entire site. Again, next slide, please. And again, an existing site plan of buildings that are there at this moment in time. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that the previous plan, which was heavily objected to, included a route for emergency services between the infrastructure proposals and Hardwick Close. This has now been removed from the application. And next slide, please. Yeah, this has now been replaced with a landscaped area, and the emergency access will come on to Henwick Road, as just underneath site, the word site is roughly where the proposed location will be now located for the emergency access. Next slide, please. Again, some sections through the application site, and again, the existing topography, which will need to be looked at carefully in order to get the gradients right for emergency services. Next slide, please. And again, you can see there this with the section with the cricket centre roughly shown, and also the Riverside building. Next slide, please. Again, this shows a section through the topography of with the cricket centre. And the next slide, please. Again, this shows a potential future academic building. Again, that's to be confirmed yet, but again, that scale we would need to have a look at the design of that. But again, another sections through what's being applied for at this moment in time. And final sections. Sorry, next slide, please. And again, this is just shows where the site clearance needs to take place, and where groundworks need to happen. Next slide, please. It shows that one part of the proposals also include a store for the arena, and this just shows the store in context with the arena behind it, and obviously next to it. The next slide, please. Again, a view of the arena store and how it relates to the arena itself. And next slide, please. Again, just another visual and keep going. Yeah, that's again a view of the site, and as you can see, it shows the old access. As I say, that's been removed, so that's not part of the approved plans. But again, it's a useful visual nonetheless to show how all the buildings relate to each other. And again, next slide. There we go. Again, this shows more infrastructure. Again, more site photos, slightly from a slightly wider, next slide please, Si. Again, shows more, slightly wider, roughly from a much bit further back by the arena. Again, next slide please. And again, a bit further back, taking account of all the kind of aspects. That should be said that the telecom mast will be removed. It will be probably need to be reapplied for, but that comes under separate legislation as a telecoms operator. And again, this shows again the existing buildings on the side. Sorry, next slide. Sorry. Again, the telecom mast in its full glory, and the existing buildings which will need to be demolished. And at the moment, sorry, go next slide, please. The site is currently being used as a compound for Barrow's House development, or in part. So it's again, you can see the palisade fencing. Again, next slide, please. Again, you can see the properties of Hardwick Close and Rectory Gardens in the background. Next slide, please. And again, another overview of the site from a bit near the arena building. That is all the slides. Apologies, it took a little bit of a while, but that's it. There is a late paper, or two late papers, just expressing views from the applicant. We are asking members to defer the application to continue the completion of the wording of the conditions under section 100ZA. That relates to agreement with the applicant to all pre-commencement conditions. I believe we're relatively close on the agreement to the wording, so there isn't any fundamental wordings, but again, I've outlined in the late paper as to where we think the amendments and textual changes, which hopefully are relatively minor, are needed. Other than that, if we can agree those minor textual changes, the recommendation would be to grant planning permission. That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. We now move to speakers. We have two objectors who will then be followed by the agent. The objectors are referring to application 7, agenda item 7. So if Messrs Cummings and Corsia could come to the table. I understand you're going to share your 5 minutes. I think we'll have your 5 minutes in total before we go to questions of the objectors. George here will keep an eye on the clock, and when you get to 4.5 minutes, your time will be notified and you need to wind up.
Can I just clarify with you? Are you having 2.5 minutes each? Have you agreed?
I will be about half a minute.
Oh, okay. All right then. Thank you very much.
Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for inviting us to this meeting. My words are: the proposed indoor cricket and education centre building is opposite my house in Hardwick Close. I've had a measure up, and it measures 80 feet, which is 24.4 metres from my house to the fence, or just after. It will be nearly as high as my house. I am asking for hedging to be planned to shield the back of the building. This will help cover the lighting, which will be on the back of the building, and also any noise. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Stuart Corsier, and I'm an owner-resident of Rectory Gardens that backs onto the proposed construction plan. I'm not sure if you're aware, but Rectory Gardens is built into an embankment. If you look back a few years, you will see that we have had problems with subsidence with a storage inspection chamber situated to the front of our properties, tilting backwards and thus not allowing storage to run away, causing it to back up into the properties and leaking into their kitchens. The work to rectify this was carried out by a company ordered to do so by Worcester City Council, resulting in the pipes having to be relayed through our back gardens, overseen by Mrs. Cameron. With steel girders being pile-driven into the ground for the new construction, vibration from this action has a potential to cause further subsidence and damage to our properties, with the worst case scenario being we could be left homeless. The planned construction is very close to our property boundary. The noise from this construction taking place is going to be horrendous, and given when the building is complete, we will inevitably suffer further noise problems from the sound of cricket balls being hit, the air conditioning units, and more footfall of people entering, leaving the building at all times of day and night. The lighting from the basketball arena, surrounding area, and car park at the moment causes light disruption and already resulted in phone calls to the university to position them as shining directly into our properties. In my objection to the proposed plans, we have supplied photographic images on a day when an event was taking place at the arena, when the car park, as it is at the moment, was full to capacity, which happens on a regular basis. There is a proposal plan to create 300 parking spaces, but with the new buildings plan for the area, what happens when the basketball arena and a cricket construction both hold events at the same time? There is going to be insufficient parking, and with the old YMCA now being uni-owned and being turned into the student accommodation, Henwick Road, Rectory Gardens, Hardwick Close, along with surrounding roads are going to be turned into car park areas with no room for residents to park. Concerns are also with St Clement's Primary School and the railway crossing with the proposed cycle route opposite the school entrance, a recipe for disaster, with the increased footfall and young children around, with vehicles from parents collecting, dropping children off at school. How long before a major accident or even a fatality? Why is this needed when a footpath and cycle path is already in existence by Hardwick Close, leading to the back of the old Worcester News or new medical centre building as it is now? The proposal is going to have a significant impact on the Severn campus and more so on the surrounding area, which is already under substantial pressure as it is, and therefore ask you to turn this proposed plans down. Thank you for your time.
Councillor Ditter.
Well, thank you, Chair. I mean, the objectors have gone back to their seats, so I don't know if that's appropriate. I've got a question to the first objector about. Sir, do you want to come back to your? Sorry, I just want to seek a bit more clarification about what size capacity of the hedge that you're talking about. And also, is there a capacity to plant that hedgerow in front of your premises?
What do you mean, the distance from our house to the building?
Yes.
Yeah, and the height. Well, what I'm led to believe is the height of it, because it's down in a dip at the moment where it will be built to the height of our house, which is near on the height of the arena. That then is going to block out our view across the St John's, over the river, and make our house so dark, our lighting is going to be on day and night if you want to be in the kitchen or use the bedroom. At the moment, we've got daylight going through the windows.
Sorry, Chair, through you. What size, what height do you need the hedge to be in front of your...
Oh, the hedge. Well, if the building is going to be that high, I don't want to sit in my house looking at this dirty, great big grey building. for what it's going to be. To me, I wouldn't like to see it there at all. I'd like to carry on seeing what I'm seeing now. I'm too old to go and move from my house, and that's it. I've been there 54 years. I know what's been going on that side for years. All sorts have been happening. I'm quite happy as it is now. I don't really want to be blocked out.
Members? Cool.
Just a couple, while Mr. Cummins is here, the elevation at 7.18 shows trees. Are they part of the proposal or are they existing? Chris?
Sorry,
718, paragraph 718.
sorry, some of the trees are existing that are shown there at the moment. It should be noted that we are the owners of that embankment, so it's not in control of the applicant, the land in front of.
So Mr. Cummins would like to see a hedge there instead of the trees, or?
Well, the trees will cover it up.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Anything else, members?
So you're happy that the existing trees remain and you want extra foliage put in there?
We'll see through the trees to see the building as it will be. It's put there. The
Right,
trees
so
have been there for years.
So you'll either see the building or the trees, and you prefer to see trees rather than building?
Well, I'd sooner see the trees more than the building, yes.
Is it an intention that the city makes that application or is actually going to do anything with the piece of land that we own?
I understand initial discussions have started between with councillors to discuss the embankment with the university, but at this moment that isn't part of this application, Councillor.
Pat?
Thank you, Chair. Mention has been made of sort of light pollution and nuisance to neighbours from existing lighting in the area. Usually, I'm just commenting here, I don't know if you know or not, that lighting is usually one of the design issues we delegate to our officers, and they have to be satisfied that it will not cause a nuisance. If the chair or myself are not satisfied, we can actually say something about it and do something about it in agreement with our colleagues here. Usually what we do is put baffles on and reduce the light pollution because of the wildlife in the area. So I would hope that might be some consolation to you. No. Ah, right. Thank you.
Jenny again?
For the other objector, please. So you mentioned the steep slope down from Henwick Road area onto the planned at the moment, and it is very steep. I wouldn't want to cycle a bike up and down that. What is your main reason for objecting to the proposed cycle or wheelchair ramp that is on the plans at the moment, quite close to the railway?
Clearly, when children are being picked up from school or dropped off, there are cars parked all over Enwick Road. It is quite substantial, and as things stand at the moment, how on earth an accident has never happened, I really don't know. There has been a point where there was an accident one Sunday, a car went into some parked cars, but that was on a quiet day. With the amount of people around, I think it's only a matter of time before there is a serious accident. I really do, and even a fatality. And do we really want to lose one of our children? I think the answer to that is no.
Chair? So following on from that, would you want to then see parking restrictions along that area of Henwick Road to facilitate cycle and wheelchair routes instead?
Well, I don't think it's appropriate to put a wheelchair access in or cycle route when you've got one already. So what is the point of this? But if it's to save lives, then so be it. As I said to you, I don't think any of us would like to see any of our children or even an adult killed. And how on earth it's not happened before now, I don't know. I really don't know. I ask you all to come up and witness the scenario up in Henwick Road we have when children are being dropped off and delivered to school and then collected.
Any more questions for the objectors, members? No? Thank you both very much indeed. We now have representation from Chris Doggs, who's the agent on behalf of the applicant. Could I just ask, are you going to just address agenda item 7 or both, 7 and 8?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to focus on the cricket centre, but I'm going to present some information for the wider infrastructure works where it sort of assists understand the two.
Great, thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for letting me speak today. The proposals here deliver university-related development and flood resilience, including safe access from Henwick Road at the university's 7 campus. These are all required through the SWDP allocation covering part of the site. Specifically, the infrastructure works will deliver the key infrastructure ahead of future development phases, including the proposed cricket centre. This is subject to funding from the LEP to prepare the ground for the continued redevelopment of the campus, and this funding requires that the enabling development commences without delay. The International Inclusive Cricket and Education Centre is being delivered in association with and part funded by the ECB to deliver another landmark international level inclusive sports facility in Worcester and at the university's 7 campus. Teaching space is also proposed with specific advantages for physiotherapy, sports therapy, new courses in cricket coaching and management, and its biometrics lab will facilitate world-leading research in cricket. Grassroots and community cricketers will also benefit from access to these facilities. Full and detailed information has been submitted to address all technical planning matters for both applications, including with regard to design and access, conserving heritage assets, flood risk and resilience, lighting, noise, archaeology and ecology. Transport and travel have also been fully considered and addressed. In short, the application submissions ensure that the developments address planning requirements fully. In particular, a series of ecology surveys have informed the proposals, including with regard to badgers, culminating in the submitted Ecological Enhancement and Management Strategy, which requires continued monitoring by specialist ecologists throughout the construction phase and identifies compensation and enhancement measures, including the dedicated area of non-intervention given over to ecological interest. Layout, car parking, emergency access, sustainable transport, tracking and road dimensions within the wider campus have all been agreed with county highways officers, and where necessary, additional details will be confirmed by way of condition. Significant additional provision for cyclists and pedestrians and for EVs is proposed, adding to the campus's sustainable transport provision. The flood risk assessments confirm that finished floor levels have been agreed with the EA, and together with provision of safe access and egress above the design flood level and provision of a flood response plan, the built developments will be safe for their lifetimes. The proposals have been careful to reduce impact on closest neighbours where possible. Generally, the former industrial outlook is replaced with a well-landscaped university campus, including prominent buildings within significant areas of open space and green infrastructure. Areas of hard standing will give over to soft landscaping, and significant net gains in biodiversity and areas of green space will be achieved. The Hardwick Close ramp has been removed from the proposals in response to residents' perceived concerns. Emergency vehicular access will instead be delivered direct from Henwick Road via the proposed cycle route, with details to be confirmed by way of condition. Measures to reduce impacts during the construction phase will be put in place with a construction environment management plan and construction hours controlled by condition. Sensitive lighting for neighbours and wildlife will follow the sympathetic strategies submitted to guide the details which are required by condition. When operational, the areas closest to neighbouring homes comprise predominantly the non-intervention wildlife area, limiting potential for impact as there will be no human activity. An additional boundary planting can be agreed as part of details to be submitted. The Cricket Centre proposal has also been careful to reduce its own impact. However, it needs to function and has been led by the requirements of the ECB. It needs a large ground-bearing floor slab, and it needs to be split into 2 distinct playing areas, a main hall to accommodate 8 nets and a separate hall acoustically designed to accommodate blind cricketers. Its length, width and height and associated roof framing for clear spans are determined by its predominant cricket use. The campus's ground conditions and other constraints have directed its location within the campus. In recognition, its roof rises away from the residential properties. Its elevation facing those has no windows or openings, save for the emergency escape doors, to prevent overlooking and limit potential for noise or light spill there. The building's design and insulation will retain noise within, as required for blind cricket. We hope that members will recognise the significant efforts made by the university and ultimately the considerable merits of the proposals and support the officer's recommendation to approve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dodds. Can I suggest that we restrict in the first instance questions to just the cricket development, and then we'll move on to the agenda item 8, which is a more general overall plan. So questions regarding the cricket pavilion.
There are a whole set of pine trees at the back of that site between what would be the cricket facility and the housing. Is it proposed that any of those are removed?
No, those trees are going to remain. They're within the City Council's ownerships. They're not actually within the university's ownership, and they're outside of the application site. There may be works needed to facilitate the construction and the height of the roof, etc., but the trees themselves will remain.
Joe?
Thank you. Comment was made from one of the objectors about light pollution and noise and light. You did mention in your presentation the phrase sensitive lighting. Could you explain what that actually means, please?
If we look at the cricket centre first, the cricket centre's lighting itself is going to be mounted to the building. And it's the way the cricket centre's orientated, it sort of focuses towards the front, so away from those residents. The rear elevation, as I said, has no lighting on it other than emergency lighting that will come into play in the event of an emergency. Looking at the wider campus, there's a lighting strategy submitted which will inform the details which are needed by condition, but that effectively sets out that the lighting will be directed away from residents and away from the ecological interest. It will also be timed and censored so that during sort of later times at night, the lighting will come on when people are using the sort of pedestrian accesses. So that's more relevant to the Henwick Road point. But in terms of the residents looking into the site, any lighting is going to be directed away from them, also because there's that area of non-intervention for the wildlife. So both of those sort of come into play. And that strategy will inform the details that need to be submitted.
Pat?
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for coming along. You have a curtain wall of glass in this building. Is that going to be a thermally efficient glass, or is it going to be some kind of heat exchange mechanism that will help to heat the building?
I mean, ultimately the materials are to be confirmed, but the cricket centre has been brought forward to be as efficient as possible. So that will be confirmed at the sort of detailed design stage.
Thank you. Any more questions in respect of the cricket development? No? What I'm proposing then is we would have a discussion about agenda item 7 and come to a conclusion about that before we move on to the agenda item 8, which is the wider proposal for the rest of the site.
But it doesn't quite work, Chair, I don't think, because the objector, when he's talking about highways, two objectors, when they're talking about highways and planting, is in the wider thing. And so I wanted to ask Mr. Dobbs questions about those.
Ask away.
Okay, so Mr. Dobbs, you said a couple of things. The first question I'm going to put you is, I probably know the answer, which is a typical politician's thing to do, isn't it? But the highways arrangement, you said a condition, it will be a condition. Could you just explain what that means, a condition, and who will decide on what the arrangements will be? And if I can ask the second question as well, you said that additional planting can be agreed, but I'd like to know agreed with whom?
Sorry, I was just taking a note just so I make sure I answer the right questions. Looking at the highways to start with, so the highways for the Severn campus, the layout, etc., has been put forward for approval, and that's been discussed with the county council and agreed. And that includes the sort of general layout of the car parking, the parking provision, the access arrangements in and out, etc. The element that I was sort of referring to that needs to be agreed is that emergency access point coming down from Henwick Road. So it would generally follow the same route as the cycle route that's proposed as part of the development, but the details just need to be confirmed for that.
Mr. Cozier, I think said that there's already unsatisfactory situation. Now, you can't be expected to ameliorate problems we've already got. But as far as the school's concerned, the concern is that you might make matters worse. Now, will you be taking that into consideration with the highways people when the arrangement comes to taking access from Henwick Road?
I mean, obviously, a safe access is going to need to be demonstrated, but just to emphasise that emergency access is literally just for very, very rare use, where an emergency vehicle needs to get into the campus and Hilton Road is flooded. So it's sort of it's a worst case scenario, not only when Hilton Road's flooded, but also when there's an emergency. So it's very rare, but obviously the details of that need to be agreed, and that will be confirmed with the county highways officers in order to discharge those details. Just as a general point around parking, the way that the campus works, so why we've sort of separated the two applications is because the campus infrastructure needs to deliver all the infrastructure required for the campus, so not just the cricket centre. So it's taken into account all of the other university buildings within the campus to identify a sufficient number of parking, for example, and it's providing enough parking to facilitate the university uses, but also thinking about that potential additional future university building that we don't know about yet. And there's additional capacity within that the idea being that obviously the university provides enough parking for itself, but also to provide enough parking to sort of reduce pressures on those surrounding roads.
And the other question was when you said that additional planting can be agreed, I asked with whom can it be agreed?
So one of the condition, or a condition on both of the cricket centre and the infrastructure works applications requires details of hard and soft landscaping, and that will obviously include the detailed planting in terms of specimens and locations, etc. The additional planting that we suggested, that I referred to in my speech, was regard to potentially the embankment at the end of Rectory Gardens, because I think there was a bit of confusion from the layout plan that we submitted, which includes that mound area, which is only drawn indicatively, so details for that mound also need to be submitted. But as it's drawn indicatively, it looks like it sort of takes away some of that non-intervention wildlife area and takes away some of that banking, which is erroneous, but as I say, it's only indicative. So the university, if it's requested, can provide additional sort of tree planting along that bank as well, so that will soften the views from those residents.
Thank you, Chair. Just an observation. It'd be really great if Mr. Dobbs involves his new neighbours when deciding on what's going to be done on planting.
Sorry, Chair, one other thing. I'm referring to the late papers and the request to vary condition 13. I'm wondering if Mr. Dodds has agreed this with our officers or not, because it asks for only 1 day of unencumbered archaeological recording to take place. Well, we're not time team. You know, do we need any more or not? I'm not sure. Can we have some clarity?
Councillor, I proposed a phase condition in the report relating to condition 13, which is one I agreed with the University of Cambridge, who do time team, just out of interest. But so that would allow the work to be carried out, obviously prior to commencement of the building, and then agreements as to how that's recorded and then disseminated to interested parties, an exhibition or being displayed in one of the buildings or something on those kind of lines, would allow that process to take place. So the advantage of a phase condition is an archaeology can take 2-3 years once you've done the archaeology, agreeing the reports and all and where it's stored. So, as I say, the advantage of a phase condition is you can get the work sorted first, and again, the timescales and access will be agreed with Worcester Archaeology Service. So, if they need more than 1 day, then they can agree more than 1 day between the archaeologists. Depends what's found, of course. If nothing's found, then.
Councillor Hodges.
Thank you. I'm a bit unsure about this embankment, because I'm reading in the report the proposals would not alter the embankment to the rear, and then I also hear that the embankment is actually the responsibility of the City Council anyway, and one of the objectors has raised issues about the destabilisation of the embankment if steel piles are driven into the ground. So, I mean, we wouldn't want to build this and then the embankment gives way and everything goes wrong. From your understanding, is the embankment safe, and are we safe with this piece of land that it won't collapse?
I mean, there's been sort of ground condition surveys undertaken. I think we just need to clarify. There's two embankments. There's the embankment on Hardwick Close, which is within the City Council's ownership, and there's the embankment within the university's ownership, which backs onto the Rectory Gardens properties. I mean, the construction environment management plan will have to set out the details in terms of any piling. So And like I say, there have been ground condition surveys undertaken. So I think we can be reasonably safe, but I think one thing that the university did mention to me is that they would be willing to undertake photographic sort of condition surveys if that's something that the residents would be would give them comfort, so that they can identify what the property's conditions are now, and if there were any impacts arising from the proposals, then they'd be readily understood.
And can I just ask, are city council officers happy with that?
Well, I think it would form part of that construction environment management plan that we could agree to undertake those surveys. But I mean, what I would say is that the university would liaise closely with its neighbouring residents anyway, before and after and during construction. And they have been liaising closely with the residents up until now. So if that's something that would help, like I say, the university are willing to do that.
If there's no more, I have two questions. In a former, I'll come back to you, sorry. In a former life, my stepson owned a flat in 34. In terms of 34 Henwick Road, your proposal to make that an emergency access egress in the event of flooding or whatever, what impact does that have on the driveway which goes down the side of 34? Because I can see you doing groundworks and there's tarmac at this level, and you're going to try and smooth that out, I guess, in terms of, because it's very steep at the minute. So have you talked to 34, and how are you going to deal with that?
Yeah, so again, the university are more than happy to undertake that photographic survey. In terms of the work that's proposed for the emergency access, effectively it's just widening the cycle path that's proposed. Like I say, it's very, very rarely and hopefully never going to be used by emergency service vehicles. So it's just about facilitating their access. But the works to that to that sort of access roads are going to be to improve it. 34 will retain its access rights. It's within the university's ownership. And also as part of the proposals, the university will install fencing or gates. And again, that's part of the conditions of details to be agreed. But generally speaking, the route through there is going to improve the outlook from 34, and it's going to improve that surface for them. So ultimately it's going to be improvements, but they will work closely with the residents. And like I say, if the owner of 34 would like a photographic condition survey undertaken as well, the university are happy to do that.
The problem with 34 is it's in multiple ownership. So you'd have to do some work with all of those residents to get that sort of agreement. But I'm sort of satisfied with that. My second issue is, I'm not sure it's covered in the late paper. I thought the original paper was quite light in terms of the impact on wildlife. There is a lot of badger activity at the bottom of the garden of 34, which then goes across the site. So can you assure us that the wildlife conditions, and perhaps it's also a question for our planning officers, that there is sufficient rigour in those conditions that we are not going to have a problem with badgers being disturbed?
I mean, I can. I mean, first off, they're protected. So they're obviously legally protected. But in terms of the badgers and all the ecology, there's been a series of ecological surveys undertaken over a period of time by the university that have informed their ongoing strategy. And ultimately that's culminated in the ecological the ecological management and enhancement strategy that's been submitted, and that basically sets out the procedures that need to be undertaken during the construction, and that includes instructing the ecologists as a sort of ecological clerk of works and also as an arboricultural clerk of works to make sure that they're on site and any interest is appropriately dealt with and managed. And that strategy also sets out any sort of enhancement strategies as part of the proposals going forward as well. So you can rest assured that the wildlife is being looked after, and I think actually the ecologists are on site now as part of that sort of pre commencement strategy. So the wildlife will be looked after.
Thanks, Chair. I think you've answered one of the two questions that I want to. I still want to sort of touch on the radius. I'm familiar with the two bankments that you're talking about and the Hardwick Close. But it's quite a steep sort of from the high to the low element. So, and I think, did you say that it would be an emergency vehicle only? Does that mean it'd be locked? The normal public won't be able to use, or how are you rectifying that?
So this is the Henwick Road access. So ultimately it will operate as a sort of shared cycle and pedestrian route day to day. But like I say, it will be designed to facilitate emergency vehicles using it. But hopefully they won't ever need to. But in terms of managing its use, obviously it's there to facilitate cycle and pedestrian use, but there can be features such as bollards to stop vehicles from using that, and I think there are bollards that basically the fire service have a sort of skeleton key, or the university as well can have a key to drop it, but in most times those bollards will be out to prevent vehicular access. But obviously it still needs to facilitate cycle and pedestrian access.
Just follow on, Chair, through you. The other bit that one of the residents were concerned about, I tried to get out what size that they needed the hedge row to be high, because there's three, as I said, three elements of it. The houses are higher, and then the road, then the embankment. Would you work with the residents to have the same sort of height that they can't visibly see the lighting and so they go? There's certain hedges, isn't it, that go certain growth and others won't. So I'll be keen to hear from your. So I think you suggested that you were willing to put some sort of hedging in front of the city council embankment.
Yeah, I mean that any planting in the Henwick Road embankment would need to be agreed with the city council, because it's the city council's land, but the university would be willing to undertake planting. I mean, what I would say is that the cricket centre has been designed so that it doesn't impact on those residents as far as possible. It's obviously set a distance away from those residents. The materials have been chosen to be sympathetic, and there won't be any lighting on that rear elevation. There will the only lighting will be emergency lighting, which will be down on the level at the emergency door, basically. So there won't be any lighting impact on them arising from the cricket centre.
Chair, this is the final one. I had one of the objectors who said that currently, when there is a usage of vehicles and there's a venue on, obviously there's a high volume of people coming, and it could particularly said that if it was two venues at the same time, obviously the flow of traffic will be huge on the vehicle. But what would you suggest to mitigate that if there was, so the residents, or they don't overflow to the other?
I mean, the main point is, as I said, that the parking provision has been identified to accommodate all of the university uses, and there's sufficient parking proposed to do that with some additional capacity. But in terms of managing specific events, I mean, ultimately that would be down to the university to manage, but they have proposed enough parking to accommodate all of their uses.
Thank you. Any more questions for Chris Dodds? No? Oh, Marjorie.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very pleased to see that there are going to be 100 EV charging points provided. Would they be available to anybody who is visiting Worcester or living in Worcester who had an electric car?
Yes, I mean, ultimately the car park is a university car park and it'll be managed by the university, but it is pay and display effectively, pay and display and university permits. So if someone was visiting Worcester, they could use the car park, yeah.
Are we all done?
Yeah, sorry, Chairman. I mean, I'm just looking at condition 7. I don't know if it's appropriate to ask the question or probably ask the officers that are removing of the manager of the golf. So I don't know where that lets. I think it's with officers, so I thought better.
Sorry, is that condition 7 of the cricket centre or the infrastructure?
Officers rather than for Chris. So if we're done with Mr. Dodds, thank you very much. Or perhaps before we move on, does the local ward member wish to say anything?
Thank you, members. I think well, there we are. We'll try for the third time, members. I called the application in because of the extensive concerns that emanated from the local community, and obviously public speakers have addressed you today to cover many of those points. Obviously, the two separate applications, initially the concerns centred around Hardwick Close in relation to the access that was proposed. That's now been removed, but there are still some residual concerns, as you've heard today expressed, in relation to how the operation of the emergency access, if it was ever used or needed to be utilised, would take place in terms of Henwick Road, which is a busy location, Chair and members, as you know, right outside a popular local primary school. If we put the emergency access aside, that will be a walking cycling route, which we obviously want to make sure is safe for people throughout the day or evening. It'll be available 24/7, so it's important to get that right. I think the concerns that remain, Chair and colleagues, are around the size and scale of this development in quite close proximity, as you've heard, to residential premises. And I think residents are concerned in relation to making sure there's more screening in terms of that particular building, whether that be hedging on the land that is currently owned by the City Council in relation to Hardwick Close, more mature tree planting, that the bund that is proposed at the rear of Rectory Gardens ameliorates as far as possible the impact of what is quite an austere building at the back. I appreciate at the front it is artistically well designed, but at the rear it is just a rear industrial looking building. And so softening that aspect for residents looking out onto that building, as I said, living there, having to see that building quite close. What I would encourage members and officers to think about is what potential undertakings could be given by the applicant in terms of the extent of the planting, the greenery, the treescape, to try and ameliorate those concerns for residents that have to live there, as you said, as you've heard, a gentleman who's lived there for many decades. And so that's what I would urge the committee to look at, how we can ameliorate these proposals in terms of the impact. And the final concern, I suppose, in relation to when this construction is taking place, members. So it is taking place in quite close proximity to people's homes. And so they've got a justifiable concern about the impact of piling, vibrations, etc. on their buildings. Because the topography is, much higher there, and so those are in close proximity to their premises. So I would just urge members to consider all those concerns and see whether, as I said, more tree planting and hedgerows and better landscaping could be done, together with honing down how that access is going to work for both pedestrians, cyclists, and God forbid in an emergency.
Thank you, Simon, for coming and speaking on behalf of the residents in your ward. You've talked about considerable concern. I was just having a look at the numbers, and from the leafleting, I can see only 3 people who actually disagreed. 1 disagreed and 2 disagreed strongly. So, that is considerable for those people, but it's not a huge number of people. From what you've said, I don't think that you're particularly objecting to the building of this facility, but you're asking the panel to be considerate of how we can make the outlook for local residents more pleasurable, and how we can stop any of the perceived problems from happening. You're not actually speaking against it. Am I right in saying that?
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to address colleagues' concerns in relation to my position on this. I've called it into the Planning Committee because I do think it is a significant size and scale of building, and so it's for you as planning members to determine whether it is a sustainable development in terms of all of its meeting its conditions in the round. In terms of significant opposition, how 2 public meetings or community meetings with residents. They were very well attended. We had to do them in the street because of obviously some of the restrictions that were in place at that time, but probably 20 plus residents at the one meeting in terms of Hardwick Close, and quite a considerable number in terms of Rectory Gardens. So whilst I understand in terms of the application, there is a mention of the pre-engagement consultation by the applicant. What I'm talking about is the meetings I held with residents to gauge levels of concerns. And as I said, there was considerable concern. The access issues in Hardwick Close have been addressed by the removal of the access road. So I do accept that. But I think there is still considerable concern in relation to the size and scale of the buildings so close to residential properties, without those assurances about how that's going to be ameliorated as far as possible, as well as the construction and piling that will be needed to be undertaken again to facilitate the building. So I would just ask members of the Planning Committee to bear those concerns in mind. I wouldn't usually call in a planning application. I can't remember the last time I did so, committee. So I always do so with due concern, not to detain the committee.
Thank you. Any more questions for Simon? No. Thank you very much. In front of us, and I suggest we deal with them in order. So we've got item 7, which is the cricket arena, and I would draw your attention to the late paper. So agenda item 7 originally recommended, subject to planning conditions, approval, and the late paper sort of enhances upon that and actually updates the recommendation that they request delegated authority to confirm the final wording of the conditions. So that's what we're voting on, or will be voting on. Comments, questions? Did I?
Sorry, Chair, delegated to Chair and Vice or officers, is it? Or I didn't quite get that.
I think it would be officers, and Chair and Vice Chair would then sign off. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. There is a construction and environmental management plan included, and I think it's probably worth stressing, given what we've heard, that we should definitely restrict the hours of construction as usual. So I'm presuming that we will see that, Chair, you and I, in due course.
It's already a separate condition, Councillor, so the hours are outside the construction management plan, but because we are already restricting that within the conditions already, and there's no disagreement on those hours.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, well, I think this is an exciting development. I think it's a high-quality landmark building. It'll bring excellent cricket facilities to Worcester for players with a variety of disabilities, and it's been supported by Sport England and by the English Cricket Board. It makes use of an urban brownfield site. It delivers sporting facilities and teaching facilities. The Conservation Advisory Panels welcomed the proposals. That's quite significant, as an improvement to the area, and Highways have no objection, and the site is well located. I think that the university has brought so many benefits to this city, and this will be yet another. I understand the concerns of local residents, and I feel sure that those concerns can be addressed by careful planning and by careful landscaping and light and noise amelioration, and I will be happy to support this and vote for it.
If that's a proposal, I'd be happy to second it. But I would say that Councillor Geraghty was absolutely right to call this in, because it is an incredibly significant application, I think, and it does impinge. And as was suggested, the size and scale are necessary for it to have such a vital difference to the community. But that impinges on the people of Hardwick Close. I've got to say, I think I can understand their objections, but I also recognise the very positive approach they've taken to this, and a sort of adult's probably not the right way, but a very mature way of raising that. And I reckon that some of their concerns have already been addressed. I think Simon's worked to change this access route, and that's sensible. And now work will be done, we're pushing an open door to do work on the landscaping and that sort of thing. So if the LEP are supporting it, if Sport England are supporting it, and it's described as being bringing vitality to the area, then I hope we can do all we can to help the people of Hardwick Close approve the application.
Before I come to Alan, was that a formal? So we have a formal proposal and a formal seconder, but before we go to a vote, Councillor Amos?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've listened to the debate with much interest, because I can see the advantages of a scheme of this nature. As always, I think it's important to listen to residents and the local member. That's why we have a planning committee, to introduce an element of other than pure technical regulations. Obviously, nobody has a right to a view indefinitely, or even for a short time. But one of the objectors did say he'd lived there 54 years. And then to be faced with an ugly grey wall, it is quite a difference. One of the fundamental principles of planning policy is that it should not, any development should not unreasonably disadvantage existing residents, because it is the existing residents who have to put up with the consequences of the development. It's not us around this table, it's the residents themselves, and this is why we do need to listen to them. I am concerned about the significant amount of construction that is going to go on. And perhaps I could ask Mr. Thompson what the hours of construction are, because you know, Mr. Chairman, we all know that we don't have a good record of enforcement of construction hours. So whatever hours we put on, I will bet you anything, this is not a bribe or blackmail, I bet you anything, they won't be stuck to. and then everything will be reactive, and so on. And this is how it always happens with these big developments, unfortunately. Ms. Hanchett said she was disappointed before the meeting started that I might not have a question for her, but I do. And it does come back to the parking situation. We're talking about, and you know, we can all be proud of it, an international facility here. And then Mr. Dodd said in one of his answers about that, oh, well, when there's an event on, that will be up to the university to manage. Well, I'm sure it will be up to the university to manage. It doesn't stop traffic chaos if there aren't sufficient parking spaces and it's not managed properly. Because I would suspect there will be quite a lot of events on that people would want to attend or come to watch. So could I ask Mr. Thompson a simple question, the construction hours, and is he giving us a commitment that they will be enforced rigorously? To Ms. Hanchett about the parking arrangements, how many, for example, how many spaces are there? It's no good the applicant saying there are enough. I mean, they would say that, wouldn't they? I want to know whether there are enough, and we can form our own judgment. Bearing in mind the context, Mr. Chairman, as I say, this is important. We need to listen to the residents. A lot of residents are affected. I looked at the maps. A lot of residents are going to be affected. It's a massive construction scheme, and the default position must be that existing residents are not unreasonably disadvantaged. Just because, you know, it's not their fault they happen to live next to a site that can become vacant to plonk this huge thing right next to them. So we need to listen to them carefully. So before I decide how I'm going to vote, I would like some reassurance on those points, please.
I'll go first to allow Karen some time to say. So the operating hours or the construction hours will be 8 till 6 on weekdays and 8 till 2 on Saturdays, and not at all on Sundays or bank holidays. So those are the proposed, and as I say, there's been no disagreement from the applicant to those. Regarding enforcement, yes, we will enforce. If there is a breach, then we will serve a breach condition notice. But the university are here and the agent is here, so I would expect that to be thoroughly enforced by the university as well.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the university are proposing 316 car parking spaces. They have provided us with a parking accumulation assessment, which does identify that there is sufficient car parking available. However, you will be aware that there are car parks such as Croft Road, Cattle Market, Crown Gate, or public car parks, all within easy walking distance of this site, obviously with access over the Sabrina Bridge. So we are content that that is acceptable.
Mel.
Chair, thank you. I'd just like to sort of echo comments that I've come across already. It is a really exciting opportunity. I think the university has been and remains, you know, it's really great for the city. And as long as the residents' concerns are, which appear to have been taken into account, yeah, I'm content. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I have one question for Andrew. Are we going to take up the offer of additional planting along the back of the cricket development?
If I could get the slide up again. Sorry, slide 21, please. That's one. So yes is the short answer. This is the proposed plan. So the embankment you can see, which has got a red line around it, that is where additional planting will be done by the university, because that is land in their control. Obviously, as I said earlier, there is discussions that have started between the university and the City Council as landowners of the other embankment to supplement that landscaping. So again, that would be outside the consideration of this application, but I'm happy to take up the tree planting, and as I say, that is conditioned as well.
Thank you. Pat?
Thank you. I hope that residents appreciate that we are trying very hard to mitigate the impacts on local people, and with the hope that this will make it acceptable to you. And I would only add that it's really due to the university that we actually have a lot of our world-class sports facilities in this city. And we are world-class in a number of ways, and it's particularly pleasing to see that this is going to be very inclusive. A lot of disability cricket will take place there, and of course, Worcester has provided a captain of England, Luke Sugg. I'd like to feel we provide a few more captains of the England disability teams, and the women's game will benefit as well. So this is even more inclusive than cricket often is. I'd very much like to see this happen, and I hope very much that we will keep our eye on this development as it proceeds, if we approve it, to make sure that the impact on residents is as little as possible. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So we have
I fully support this application. Now, when you think what was there before, there was a bowling alley and lots of other tatty buildings. This is so much better than what was there before, and the university's got a good reputation for building and being a good neighbour. So I think I'm sure that the concerns of local residents will be taken very seriously on board by the university. So I'm very content and would like to support.
Thank you for that. So we have a recommendation to approve the application, and in addition we've got the late report, which also updates that recommendation with officers requesting delegated authority to update the elements and planning conditions and the issue of the grant of planning permission, and we'd want that to come via chair and vice chair before it gets published.
That was I assume that the part of it was additional planting as a condition, because I think the applicants already agreed with that.
Planting within the application is agreed. The issue will be the bit of land that we own, which is not part of this planning app, so we can't deal with that today, but I leave it to our planning officers to negotiate a good deal, so to speak.
You can answer the question.
Just for clarity, which condition 7, this is for the cricket centre. So, yeah, so the condition 7 for the cricket centre, if I get to the right page,
removal of the goals.
So yes, this is taking forward the recommendations of the ecological assessments. But one of the things we're aware of as officers, and I'm sure members are, is the issue of gulls on the roofscape and interfering. They also probably have an impact on swifts, swallows and all the other house martins as well. So what we are asking is for details of that. The university already do that on their university buildings. So we're just asking for details of how they're going to manage that. Now, I have had a discussion with the agent already. I think we're pretty close to, it's just what rather than if.
To the back.
Thank you, Chair. So to confirm the motions to delegate authority to the Corporate Director of Planning and Governance, subject to consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair, to confirm the final wording of the conditions as detailed in section 9 of the report and the late paper, and issue the decision notice. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Those against? And any abstentions? 2. The motion's carried, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. So we can now move on to agenda item 8, which has already been the subject of much discussion. Unless there are any supplementary questions. I take the absence of anybody offering supplementary questions. I'm looking for a recommendation or a motion from one of them.
I recommend approval as already discussed. Yeah.
So we have a proposer and a seconder to approve agenda item 8. And again, with the same condition that the officers wish to have delegated authority to detail the planning conditions, and we'd apply the same rule that says we'd like the chair and vice chair to sign that off before permission is granted.
Thank you, Chair. The motion is as stated by the Chair, the same as the previous motion. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Those against? Not any abstentions? 1 abstention? Any abstentions? Sorry? Oh, sorry. Okay, you voted for, Councillor Cleary. I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand when I went around the room. I apologise. 10-4, Chair. The motion's carried.
Thank you for that. We now move on to agenda item 11, 7 Cove Gardens. Sure. So agenda item 11, 7 Cove Gardens. You have the original paper and a late paper. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an application for various extensions under planning application 2100295 HP. Okay, so can we get the first slide up, please? Slide 73. Thank you. Next slide, please. Oh, you've gone one too many. Thank you. So this is the application site. In fact, it's not outlined in red on this one, but it is the for 7 Cove Gardens, which is the property in the centre of the screen at the cross of the 2 Ordnance Survey maps, lines. Next, so this is the existing garage and house. Next slide, please. And again, another front view of the front of the property. Next slide. So this is the rear of the garage. As you can see, some of these elements are partially started in terms of partially retrospective. So you can see here the canopy, which is one of the proposed extensions to the garage, has already commenced. Next slide, please. This is the existing single-storey extension, and there's a proposed first floor extension above that. Next slide, please. Again, this shows the view to the neighbour at number, sorry, get this wrong, 5. Sorry, next slide, please. This shows the an relatively older, again, work has started now on this, but to the front of the property, and this is a boot room / porch proposal. Next slide, please. Again, another view of the single-storey extension. Next slide, please. This is a view from the neighbour, taken a couple of months ago. And again, this shows the existing relationship from the neighbour to the single story rear extension, and again, you can see the canopy in the background. Next slide, please. So these are the proposed floor plans. Slide. And sorry, existing floor plans was the previous slide. These are the proposed floor plans. Slide. Again, existing and proposed existing elevations. Next slide, please. And these would be proposed elevations. Again, this shows just again 2 car parking spaces being proposed at the front or as existing, and sorry, 3 park. And this would show that you can actually fit 3 car parking spaces at the front. So, next slide, please. So, what we got here are the 2 maps. On the left-hand side is the public right-of-way. So, when the properties were built, the definitive right-of-way has never been altered, and from the map. And on the right-hand side, you can see again the boundary of the conservation area outlined in red, which doesn't include the property, but does include the rear garden and clips the garage, the existing garage extension. So again, there's clearly so when we're considering the impact to the conservation area, we're considering the impact on the setting more than the impact on the conservation area in itself. Again, next slide, please. So what we've got here is the right-of-way, as you may recall, cuts through the gardens of Cove Gardens, not just number 7, but also number 6 and number 8. But as you can see, there is already a right-of-way that has been implemented and is very well surfaced, and several people were using it when I was present on site. And if you have a look at next slide, please. Unless you're very good at climbing brick walls, actually getting onto the public right-of-way or the definitive public right-of-way would be nigh on impossible. Certainly impracticable. So again, there is an issue with the definitive map, and obviously the issue of the existing right-of-way that was obviously there. I think that's all my slides. Yes, thank you. So since the publication of the reports, there has been a letter written by the neighbour at number 8, Cove Gardens, on behalf of himself and other neighbours, as I understand it. That's set out in full in the belay paper. We haven't amended that. From our perspective, Councillor, the issues have been carefully considered. The application's been in for in excess of 10 months. We have twice gone out to formal consultation, and many of the comments and issues, in fact, all the comments and issues raised also included the issues of bits of the application that have been applied for retrospectively. So from our point of view, and in addition to that, we've obviously spent time from the site photo on site and looking at the neighbour's point of view. So from our point of view, the application has been considered carefully and fully, and all the issues have been identified, and as such we're making no change to the recommendation set out in section 9 of the main report. That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. Can I now...
Before we go into the objections, just like I be clear about other members as well. Would Mr. Thompson just take us back to one of the pictures which would show, as far as possible, the effect of the first story extension? So I can't quite see what that would look like. It's got a front, a single story, garage extension, side garage, and first floor rear extension. I just want to see what that would look like, if I may.
Just finding the relevant slide. Yes.
Which picture is that on?
Top right. Right, yes. 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 So yes, top right is, and you can see the garage behind it. So top right, left-hand side, council. So top right, but in the centre. I would stand up, but it's no benefit.
Well,
but
top right in the centre.
that's it, that one there, where the cursor is.
Right. Do we have a picture of what that would look like then from the neighbour? We had a picture from the neighbour, didn't we?
Yes, if we go back one slide.
From the neighbour's perspective, what would that look like?
So if you go back to slide 82.
Yeah, that's the one, yeah.
There you go.
So just to, Mr. Chairman, sorry to be unusual, but just to clarify. So what we've got there, the extension, so it'll be another floor on top of that, basically.
Correct.
Right. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So can I call forward Rob Louch? Is it? Indeed. Whilst you have that, we'll have 5 minutes to address the committee. The committee will then ask you whatever questions they wish to ask. 4.5 minutes, Georgina will give you a nod saying you need to wind up.
Right, I'm on. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Just like to start by saying, hope you all did actually have the opportunity to read the late paper, and apologies because I know it's fairly detailed and there was a lot of information in there, but we felt it was necessary to respond in full, to summarise everything that had gone before, and to actually review the report written for approval by the case officer. Despite the omissions and errors which we saw within the case officer's report, despite the official line of the path as detailed on the definitive map, despite a possible 45-degree line breach in elevation, only plan has been detailed, despite that no bat survey has ever been requested, and despite 3 elements, as Mr. Thompson's pointed out, having already commenced without any planning permission, we fundamentally believe that the case officer's conclusions were not balanced and not a true reflection. As we outlined in the report, they're not without merit, but they didn't consider some other important factors. The property, whilst it has a rendered modern appearance, actually dates back in part to 1728. It's never been listed, although there was talk many, many years ago that perhaps should be done. Nevertheless, the historical nature of the property and its proximity to the conservation area were largely or completely ignored. This isn't a case of NIMBYism, and to make the point, I believe this is the only planning application within Cove Gardens that has ever been opposed, and there has been several applications. Indeed, even going back to 2011 with the dining room extension, which perhaps in hindsight isn't the best, there was no objection because it was out of view. It didn't essentially alter the property in any significance, especially when planting was along the rear wall. It's a genuine concern. It's a heritage asset, both the building and the visual impact from the conservation area, not also negating substantial intrusion upon immediate neighbours, despite what the conclusions of the case officer are. The plans and alterations are many, 6 in total, and none of them enhance the property, street scene, or the conservation area. In our view, they don't reach any classification of good design, and if permitted, would be the final nail in the coffin for the property, because it would be surrounded by modern extensions and developments. As we all know, Worcester's historically sadly lost too much of its history, And the fact that a property isn't listed doesn't mean that it cannot and should not be considered an asset. The fact that the property only shares a boundary with a conservation area, something which was highlighted in the officer's report, doesn't mean that it's devoid of responsibility. Even more so, perhaps, when the vast majority of that property's land actually is part of the conservation area, all of the riverland. As I've said, it's not a modern property. It's, when it was restored and renovated in 2006, it was done with as much sympathy as possible. It's a property with provenance and some history, and the Spreckley brewers used to own it, going back over 100 years. It's a property which deserves attention in our view and care, and hopefully can still be worthy of note in years to come, if not generations. We truly believe that decisions should be made by the councillors here today which are worthy of us all, and actually challenge and counter those, rather than just saying, yep, we approve this because it's householder planning. In our view, the summary on the first page of the late paper that we produced details sufficient planning reasons for rejection, and we ask that the councillors fully consider what we've documented and refuse the application on those grounds. As far as we're concerned, there is quite literally no second chance after the damage has been done. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the objector? No.
Yeah, thank you. Just with, obviously, when we went through the presentations and we looked at the slides, obviously some building work had been completed whilst the application hadn't been approved, which people do, I think wrongly do. But with that, I guess, how, if yourself and the residents had not contacted or enforcement would have been contacted, I guess it would be built now and you would be coming here today with...
Yes, I mean, if we hadn't, if enforcement hadn't been notified, then yes, the rear garage extension, as we call it, the bit that overhangs the boundary wall, the side garage extension, which you can see is covered by tarpaulin, also looks that's been started, and the front porch stroke boot room extension would have, yes, all been completed without notification to anybody, and this would be an even different approach again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Amos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Louch, can you just tell me what side of the property do you live on? Because earlier when I asked to see the effect of the first story extension, do you live on that side or the other side?
I live on the other side, so I'm number 8. The view that you were seeing, which Mr. Thompson took, was actually from number 6. So the second story extension, arguably the main part of this application, is the part that directly affects number 6. And that's why I also mentioned that whilst a 45-degree plan view was done, the elevation view wasn't done. But that part is also the part from the historical side of the building. The alteration is most incongruous. It really does. And so the dining room extension, just about you could get away with, but even then, I think it was Carl Jukes, who was the conservation officer at the time, mentioned that it looked heavy, and he said it should not block views of chimneys, etc. That still stands. If a second story went on, all of those historical factors and the barge boards would be gone or hidden.
In the late papers, you mention 6 additions and alterations, and I've just been trying to count where they are. There's a proposed porch boot room, which is an extension to the front of the property, an extension to the front of the garage, an extension to the rear of the garage, and then the first floor extension, which is built above the bit that already is an extension sort of on the back of the house. That's 4. I can't quite find where 5 and 6 are.
Okay, right. It's probably easier if we have on the case officer's report on about the 4th page. I think Mr. Thompson actually maybe brought that view up on the slide himself before. But I'll go through them, I'll count them off. So, as I say, if everyone can keep with me, it's the front garage extension, the rear garage extension, which is what we call the canopy, the side garage extension. So there's 3 there, and that's internal to the property grounds itself. The single-storey extension above the dining room, which is 4. The front porch stroke boot room, which is 5. And again, something else missed off reporting from the case officer's report, although it is detailed on one set of plans, is the alteration to the front door to come in between the current bay window, which is bizarre, but yes, that is actually there, but not mentioned within the case officer report, another omission.
Marjorie.
I think I've read in several places that this property forms a pair with another property. So when we look at that picture that we had just then, that's the whole house, is it? That's not the 2 properties, because it's a bit confusing with it having. So when we're looking at that, is that just number 7?
Yeah, that property there is number 7.
Sorry.
What originally happened, going back historically, there were 2 properties a couple of hundred years ago. Those were joined together by, I think it was actually before the Dorrells, as in Stephen Dorrell MP, his mother and father purchased it. And then they had it as 1 property, but it was originally 2. Then when the development of Cove Gardens came in 2006, they split it back into 2 properties again, which was the original design, which is again a lovely part of it. So number 6 and number 7 are actually sister properties, which again, going back to the case officer's report, where they note that all properties are similar of style and design. They're not. 6 and 7 are absolutely unique. And again, another reason that we believe that the plans, the designs and everything else just aren't becoming of them.
Thank you, Chair. One of the objections or comments is that it regards the right of way. But the problem for us is that we aren't allowed to decide anything about the right of way. It's not within our brief at all. What it is actually is a legal matter. So I'm afraid we can't help you there. I'm sorry. It's one of those things that we just aren't allowed to rule on.
Yeah, regarding the right of way on the definitive map, it was highlighted by us as a fact of, from our point of view, it was something that the case officer had just stated was a technicality, but yet public rights of way themselves had actually come back and said, this isn't a technicality, this is a criminal offence. And what we were highlighting was the disparity between 2 parts of the council planning application. So anyone voting on it should be aware of that could be a potential issue and take it in mind. And as you've just said, from your aspects, it's not. However, having said that, what we tried to do within the summary page, just in case people didn't have the opportunity to read the whole of the late paper, was to actually say over and above that, and what I've stated here today as well, there are at least 3 or 4 good reasons, planning reasons, that this should be rejected. Even if you take that into account, out of account, even if you take things missing like the 45 degree in elevation, even if you take out missing BAT reports, missing objections, all of those can be pushed aside because the actual reasons that we state on the first page of that late paper, if the councils were minded to do that.
I can tell you also that planning decisions are made individually on the day. There are no precedents. So we won't be making a decision on the basis of precedent, just for reassurance there.
Any other questions? Objector? No?
Thank you.
Heard the objector. You've seen the original paper and the subsequent amendment to the paper. So we go into open discussion. Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to ask why the Conservation Advisory Panel was not consulted in this application as a starting point.
I don't know, Councillor. The short answer is that obviously the conservation area brings, the conservation officer brings any applications they think are of interest in conservation terms to the conservation area advisory panel in consultation with the chair of the panel. So again, that would have been a discussion with the conservation area officer.
Thank you. Well, this committee don't generally like retrospective applications, just as a comment. But this building seems to be growing like topsy. It appears from what's been said that the original one-storey dining room or whatever it is, extension at the back, which is not exactly in keeping with the rest of the building, didn't get planning permission at the time, and now other bits are being tacked on in all sorts of directions. And I just don't think it's good enough design or planning that we allow this. So although the recommendation is to grant, I certainly would be against this. Thank you.
Can I just correct that? The rear extension did get planning permission in 2011. That's set out in paragraph 5.1 of the main report.
I was listening to the
Councillor Amos.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Mr. Thompson's introduced a new concept into planning law, because he said earlier in his presentation that this was partially retrospective. Well, with respect, it's either retrospective or it's not, and it clearly is. So Mr. Thompson perhaps can clarify that some other time. But could I just also ask some factual questions, because like Councillor Barnes, I'm getting confused by this one. They want to a front extension of the garage and a side extension or rear extension of the garage. Now, I know, I mean, garages are often used for a room. It happens all the time. I make no comment on that. We can't do anything about it. It's not within our purview. So if something's built as a garage, it's used as a room, then so be it. But can I ask Mr. Thompson, in view of the fact that there's two aspects to this garage that's going to be increased unusually from two sides, as it were, it is obviously then possible that it is used as a room. I understand at the moment it's 2-bedroom. Is that correct?
Yes, it is a 2-bedroom, as far as I'm aware. Yes.
Right, okay, it's 2-bedroom. So presumably then the first floor rear extension, is that intended for a third bedroom?
That is a bedroom, yes.
Right, so it's going from 2 to 3 bedrooms, and the garage is going to be extended on 2 sides. So clearly, I mean, presumably that would then be for, or usable as another room over which we would have no control.
Correct.
Correct, right. And you're saying there's room for 3 car parking spaces?
That's what was shown on the plan, yes. And
right. Are they parking spaces where you can open the door, or parking spaces where you can't open the car door? Ms. Sanchez, shall another second question for you, Karen?
Sorry to interrupt. Through you, Chair. Although the applicant is showing 3 parking spaces, we have commented to say that they are not 3 workable car parking spaces. They can only achieve 2 spaces, but a 3-bedroom dwelling under our current standards only requires 2 parking spaces, so they do comply. But yeah, we agree you cannot get 3 parking spaces in there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm grateful to Ms. Tangent for confirming there's 2 parking spaces for a 3-bedroom property. We've established that one of the extensions is for a 3rd bedroom, but given the garage, you could well be talking of a 4th room. There's no question in my mind, because if you can't get a car into that garage, I can't see why they're extending it, because you still can't get a car into the garage because of the width of it, because then you can open the door. So, and I think one of the objectives, actually, Mr. Chairman, summed this up very nicely. So it's an interesting phrase. The proposed development will overwhelm the existing plot. And I think that's exactly what's happening here. I mean, it is bizarre, the bits adding on, the extensions. I mean, I can't see there's going to be any land left at all. You're extending the footprint, you're changing the design, you're changing the whole concept of this building in a conservation area. My advice would be, if you want a house this size, move to somewhere else. Because I think we have to think of the residents. When Mr. Thompson pointed out where the rear extension would be, that would be an enormous feature for everybody on that side of Cove Gardens. An enormous, at the moment, because the extension at the rear at the moment is just hedge height. I can see why people said, well, that's fair enough. But if you're going to cover the whole back, so it seems to me it's gross overdevelopment of this site. I am worried about the parking because, as Ms. Hanchett said, 2 spaces for 3 rooms, which will include the rear extension, but almost certainly you're going to have another room for the garage, this extended garage. So I think I would be happy to move refusal on the grounds that this overdevelopment is out of keeping, and frankly, it's ridiculous to knock a house about like this on this footprint in a conservation area.
Chair, thank you. I would like to second Councillor Amos's proposal to reject, and I would also just like to make a few comments. I would like to say I'm very relieved now, having read this report and knowing the area myself, that it was called in, because obviously we've been told it's been looked at in detail, it's been with the City Council for a while, and when you look at paragraph 3, similar to Mr Louch who spoke, it says that the application site proposals detail the property is located within the Riverside Conservation Area, and it is of similar site design and construction to the neighbouring properties within the street. Well, it clearly isn't. It is just the same as the one neighbouring property that's been discussed. So that, to me, right from the start, provides no assurance. We haven't looked at we haven't had the BAT survey, and as we say, we haven't looked at the sort of the setting either. I just feel as though it's, I'm surprised that it has been recommended to improve, and you can see it is quite a complicated application, and, thank goodness we have members, who are experienced and have asked the relevant questions, because the presentation was quite quick, and I think it would have been quite difficult, for people to understand if they hadn't asked the extra questions, and it has, similar to other properties we've had at planning, they've grown arms and legs and they've become not what the property was originally intended for, and not suitable, and it's, there's heritage, there's conservation. I just think it's wholly inappropriate, and I'm quite disappointed by paragraph 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Mel. Marjorie?
I'm opposed to this development. I agree with much of what's been said, but I just want to particularly highlight the business of the part of the property being in a conservation area. This really sort of tipped the balance for me, not that there is much balance. The heritage asset is not just the conservation area, but it's the building and the building next to it. And I just think it would be so wrong if people enjoying that area have to look over the wall and see this massive two-storey extension. So I'll be voting against. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill, and then...
Thank you, Chair. 2 questions, please. I'm, like Councillor Amos, I'm a little bit confused about this. Do I understand that work has already begun on this extension?
Yes.
And has it been stopped?
Yeah, well, in part, yes, but again, occasionally there are, I understand some work has continued to take place.
And is this construction euphemistically called another wraparound extension, such as came before the Planning Committee last month?
I wouldn't describe it in those terms, no, councillor. I wouldn't describe it as a wraparound.
Right, I totally object to this again, because it's one of these so-called wraparound extensions where the property is effectively demolished and its character totally destroyed along with the character of the area, and then systematically just rebuilt with bits tacked on here and there. So this is not an extension at all. This is a complete redevelopment of the property, a complete rebuild, and I find it totally unacceptable to the character of the area that this could even be considered, and I therefore object to it in the strongest terms and shall be voting against it. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Cleary.
I agree with everything that's been said. I'm opposed to this. My main issue with this is the idea that work has started without permission and work didn't stop in many respects. That makes me very, very uncomfortable, and it gives me an example of the attitude of the person who's doing the work. As well as what Bill said, this is a wraparound extension, whether we want to admit it or not. I'm perfectly happy to oppose this, and I think everybody should.
Joe.
Thank you. Do we have any idea what the percentage enlargement of the property is with all these? It's difficult when you have several bits being added on to be able to imagine how much larger the final building is going to be than the original. That would be one question. Do we have any idea what the percentage enlargement is? I'm a little bit concerned about the comments about being in a conservation area, because when we look at the comments of the Worcester City Council Conservation Officer, he or she has no objection. They say that the site is unlisted, but within the Riverside Conservation Area. The revised scheme is an improvement, so no overriding objections. So here we are saying that it's a blot on the conservation area, but our conservation officer doesn't back that up. So if we were using that as a reason for a refusal, I don't know how we could back that up when our conservation area says, he or she is happy for it to go ahead. I think if any public are listening, don't ever underestimate how difficult it is to sit on the planning committee and try to weigh something up when you can see the flaws in a scheme, but when you can also see that, if you're going to refuse it, on what basis are you going to refuse it? It is very difficult. Any idea on percentage?
Councillor, the policies of size and percentage increase aren't relevant to the consideration. There's nothing in planning policy, so we wouldn't do that assessment unless it's in the greenbelt, in which case you have to assess disproportionate additions. In that respect, we haven't and we don't do those kind of calculations. In respect to the Conservation Officer's comments, obviously that is a judgment, a professional judgment, and if you disagree with the Conservation Officer, that is your judgment as decision maker. It would be a consideration of planning judgment, not you wouldn't be erring in law, you would be making a different judgment.
Councillor Roberts.
It's a bit on the same lines of Joe. We don't like this application, and in the future that might be a reasonable grounds to object, because the beauty of the application is to be taken into consideration in future planning decisions. But I'd certainly counsel against throwing the toys out of the pram because it's retrospective. In Pat's area, there was virtually a hospital built retrospectively. I mean, Aikenbury North was 2 years and did all sorts of alterations. And if a hospital authority can't get it right, then it's a bit much to sort of say that nobody else can't enjoy what the planners say. Is that they seek to put things right through retrospective application. So I don't see that's any grounds whatsoever. I don't see the grounds of it being a conservation area or any grounds whatsoever if it's not a conservation area. So that gets down to, is it overdevelopment? I mean, we can't talk about the light because it meets all those standards. You could perhaps say that it's overdevelopment and not in keeping with what is there already, which, you know, I'll go along with that, but it's getting pretty weak. So I'm echoing Joe saying a bit, I'm afraid. You can't just say, I don't like this. No, thanks very much.
Well said. I mean, I struggle in one respect. If we give this permission, it almost suggests that you can get away with things. But on the other side of the argument is we would need a good planning reason to reject it. And I struggle with what the planning reason is.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, yes, I mean, I'm not proposing we refuse it on the grounds of it being retrospective, although it is. I'm using planning grounds. And frankly, if we can't refuse something like this planning committee has no purpose. Because as far as I can see, so far, the majority of members who have spoken don't want it. If we've now got to allow it, then we just let the technocrats and the planners make the decisions for us. It shouldn't be before us. It's here because there is a judgment to be made. And it is our judgment, basically, to judge what others have put before us. The officers may recommend approval. Our judgment may be something else. The conservation officer may make a decision or a judgment. Our judgment may be something else, but our decision is final. That's why we have this committee. And what I proposed was that we refused it on the grounds of, and you can use all or some of them, overdevelopment due to the mass, out of character and not in keeping with the area, and overlooking. They're all good, solid planning reasons. And that's why we don't want it.
Marjorie?
I'd just like to add another reason in connection with this, the setting of the conservation area. Paragraph 717 says the proposals are considered to preserve the setting of the conservation area, and there will be no impact on the conservation area itself. Therefore, the proposal will be in accordance with policy of the development plan and the aims and objectives of the NPPF. But my view is, and I think the view of some of the other councillors, is that these proposals do not preserve the setting of the conservation area, and therefore they're not in accordance with the policy of the development plan or the aims and objectives of the NPPF.
Thank you for that. Pat?
Thank you. There are only two reasons here, I think, why you could reject it if that's what you want to do. One is that it is overdevelopment, as you've noted, Councillor Amos. I'm not sure that'll stand up, but it might. And the only other one is the one that Councillor Bissett's just mentioned, which is that it doesn't enhance or preserve the area, which is a conservation area. And we'd have to do that in the teeth of our conservation areas officer, if we wanted to sustain that objection. So that would be pretty tough going. And our decision isn't entirely final, Councillor Amos, as we all know. Our decision can be appealed. And therefore, a government inspector would make a final decision.
Yes, Michelle, I'm absolutely well aware of that. This is why we've given three reasons. I'm happy to go with Councillor Bissett's, when she talks about, I'm forgetting her exact words, but out of character, not in keeping. And Councillor Agar has also referred to the point about being overdevelopment, and I've used overlooking. I mean, we've got to remember, people seem to be unduly worried about an appeal. Appeal is a decision like this would be unwise if we didn't have good planning reasons. The inspector is going to look at the reasons we give, and he or she is going to consider whether we have carefully considered this matter, weighed up the evidence, and come to a reasonable judgment, all of which we've done. We can't do any more. We can't keep second guessing what an inspector may or may not do. But in terms, if people are worried about the cost, we do not get costs awarded against us if we follow those rules of giving good planning reasons, coming to a sensible, reasoned consideration of the matter, weighing up the evidence for and against. You do not get cost awarded if you do those things. If we lose an appeal, then we've lost an appeal. But if we're not going to refuse something that we don't want because we might lose an appeal, then as I say, we might as well not be here. It's a waste of time.
Chair, may I finish what I was saying? Thank you. What I was saying was I think it's an extremely finely balanced judgment. It's not, we don't refuse things because we might have an appeal, that's true, or grant things. That's not the main thing. What I am saying is I honestly don't think that we're going to do well on appeal. It's very, very finely balanced. And we've already granted one extension to the darn thing, and we can't do anything about that. So what we can do to this is minimal, to tell the truth. So I think actually I'm going to vote in favour.
Andrew?
Yeah, so in terms of, obviously, as I said, it's a planning judgment and it is a balance case, and we all recognise that, and that's, I think the wording is there. So I've listened, there would be a planning reason out of the wordings you suggested. There are no windows overlooking the neighbour's property, so in the proposal, so I wouldn't suggest overlooking. So if you were to go with the reasons you've set out, it would be a reason, and again, this would have to be agreed with you and the Vice Chair, councillors, is something along the lines of the proposed development by reason of their mass, scale and design would be out of keeping with the existing character of the area and original dwelling, and have an and this is the bit where you would need to agree, have an adverse impact on the setting of the conservation area, rather than the actual conservation area, because as you saw on the map, it's not in the conservation area other than the small part of the rear garden. So that would be, and then obviously adding policies and the like onto it.
Well, I think, Mr. Chairman, I think those words are absolutely excellent, absolutely fine. Yes, happy to forget the bit about overlooking, because it's quite right, there are no windows in there. But impact, I think, would perhaps be a better way, impact on other properties, certainly from the side that we saw. But I think what Mr. Thompson said is absolutely fine. It sounds to me, I would say, more than on balance. I think they're quite strong reasons, but it's up to the committee.
Joe?
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to ask about the overlooking, because I don't think I've read anything in here. I think we have a danger sometimes of deciding that we don't like something and start throwing out all sorts of reasons why we could refuse it, which don't stand up. And certainly the overlooking one, I don't think would have done, because there's nothing in this report. And I'm sure all the angles and the 45 degrees and things have been done, and overlooking is not a reason. So I think we have to proceed with care if we're going to refuse something, that we are actually putting forward a valid planning reason for refusal, which, and we are obliged as a planning committee to put forward a reason that would stand up to scrutiny. And if it was appealed, would stand up, we believe at this moment in time, would stand up to an appeal. And I just feel that the reasons for refusal at the moment are weak, and so I think I shall approve it. I shall vote to approve this. Well, I shall vote against refusal.
Jenny?
I stand by my view that we should refuse this. However, I think this is one of the cases where a site visit would have been really useful, so we could have actually understood the context better. And I think in future, these sort of situations, we do need to start having site visits again, just so that we fully understand. Because the best people in the world know the photos that we were shown were great, but the screen's a long way away. And I don't really think that we maybe got the best information. So in future, please, these sort of cases, let's go out and see.
Mel?
Chair, thank you. Yeah, obviously, just to mention, and I agree with what Jenny has said. Obviously, I know this area. I've walked this area a lot, and I would say it's completely out. You know, it's not in keeping with the setting, with the conservation setting, and also. Again, but it will be outside of this. I know you have to look at planning on its own merits, but this is an area which is close to a river footpath, which has been closed for some time, and please do not underestimate, I guess the weight and the thoughts of others. People have been very upset about that footpath and very upset about the conservation area and its setting. And these are very, important issues, and it is valid for planning as well. I just wanted to put that context. And I've been there, and I would say it's very out of keeping, and many people walk that way a lot, should we say.
Thank you for that. We have a proposal to reject the application. We have a seconder to that effect. Unless there's any other comments, we shall go to a vote on that basis.
So the proposal, if I'm sorry, Councillor, it's the resolve to refuse planning permission on the grounds detailed by Mr Thompson, having picked up on the comments of members, and delegate authority to the Corporate Director of Planning and Governance, and it's subject to consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Planning Committee to confirm the final wording of the above grounds and issue the decision notice. All those in favour of refusal on that basis. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those against refusal. 1, 2, 3, and abstentions, please. 2. The application is refused. Thank you, Chair.
Can I suggest if you need to use the facilities, you do it now? The feathers. The feathers?
No, we're doing feathers next.
It's the feathers next.
Press that button and then speak normally. Hi Lynn, can you hear me? Yeah, you've realised we've just paused for a few moments, Lynn. So
Yeah. And can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear and see you absolutely fine, Lynn. All right, and Mr. Ball's here as well, so I've just had a chat with him. All right, we won't be long. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry? Good evening. Oh no, it's only good afternoon. It feels like good evening. For that somewhat elongated. We now move on under item 12.
Thank you, councillors. This is application 21 /00887 /FUL. It is relating to the Feathers Public House, 45 Upper Tithing, and it's an erection of a new garden terrace on an existing Feathers Public House. As set out in the report, this is a finely balanced case. Called in by Councillor Denham, I understand. So to go through the slide, please. Oh, the pub is outlined in red. The existing flat roof extension, where the terrace sits. Back lane. And this is the other way road. Ground floor. Note the greenery. First floor would be the first floor will be treated as well. The boundaries to the first floor to again reduce. Next slide, please. Again, this is a window. This is way out, so to speak. So, are the plans for the bit closer. Again, just showing. So yeah, this, as I say, this is a finely balanced case. So there is, at the moment, the pub has operating hours 2 a.m. in the morning. What betterment the proposing to restrict all external areas to PM includes the existing. But because it is a finely balanced case, we thought we'd balance. No late papers or anything else.
Thank you, and welcome to
John Ball, and I live at number 50 Britannia. Property has rear 25 metres. My neighbour, who is immediately proposed development, proposed development will affect many local. Both an affected neighbour and sure that this committee will have seen residents who live residents universally object. Nuisance, both during normal Weathers has now obvious that they plan to hold more and more music events. Club license allows indoors also allowed. Current situation further concern, the plans submitted do not contain any terrace on the correctly shown. Very small top coping stone. Reality is higher than it is. Top of the wall will be at approximately intoxicated. Notice that originally Worcestershire County Highways have requested a deferral of the application. Furthermore, the flat roof has a additional structure, horizontal surface, and also to withstand roof load caused by standing and seating, unspecified. Further increase residents. Recognise that conversation based on the significant impact or opportunity.
technical view.
Places in my original. But grounds for objection. But in what WRS do is talking that basis statutory nuisance. Residents, but the application was granted. Subsequently, reasonable basis. I've pointed out. Oh, yes, indeed. But the reason that I think the reason that people are getting music noise is because that back door's being left open at the moment. I suppose closing it at 10 o'clock help, depending on how well insulated it is, and the rest of the building. But we're only looking at this from the point of view of the terrace being used, aren't we? Issues of noise nuisance from music or recorded music within the building can be referred to WRS as a nuisance and straight a nuisance is being caused. Subsequently, recording equipment could be placed within their dwellings and made of whether a noise nuisance exists. Although in saying that, there are some standards for noise from pubs and clubs, which could be used to support any such alleged nuisance.
So what I think you're saying is, and a nuisance occurred in the view of local residents, you could actually measure and establish whether or not that is a nuisance and serve enforcement.
Well, it depends whether it's what it is. If it's amplified music, yes.
Yes.
If it's just people speaking loudly on the roof terrace, probably no.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Steve, I'll be conscious to know that the common sense sort of generally prevails, then if it's currently doors are left and I think the hours are up to 1. Flow of, as people are sitting out there, there'd be a constant flow coming in and out. But that generates, if they're playing live music, surely that would generate more noise. Because they'd be going up to the roof line or, that would, surely there must be some mechanism how you measure and what sound that is permitted. Obviously in the evening it carries longer than...
In terms of music noise, statutory nuisance is not really based on absolute noise levels. You can assess the noise, but the door's going to be shut at 10 o'clock. What's been proposed, that would help existing issues. Moment, I imagine, people are free to go out into that small courtyard while music is still being played, and obviously an open into the noise insulation of the building.
So Steve, I'm going to come back to you, but there must be a statutory sound that you must have guidance to say this is permitted and this isn't. That's what I think the chairman was trying to get, and I'm trying to locate as well.
No. If you've got a pub in the middle of nowhere, marquee, right, then it's quite different. So you can't set absolute levels and link it with annoyance.
Councillor Amos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Where we are we being told that if this is approved, then the pub, although it will be playing live music, that will be only till 10 p.m. Door on the ground floor will be closed. At the moment, they can presumably play loud music longer, and that door could be open. Is that what we're being told?
So they could continue we can't change the terms of the licence, so the licence could continue until 2 a.m, but they couldn't use the external areas after 10 p.m. At the moment, the external courtyard on the ground floor, which is
So are we saying then, because I'm not sure whether it's for us or for licensing, but are we saying then, whatever happens, whoever's responsible, as a result of this, if this were to be approved, then the live music and the doors will stop at 10 p.m. So theoretically, well, hopefully in practice, the noise that can emanate will stop at 10, not go on till 2. And that the only noise on the terrace would be people's voices. But as Mr. Ball said, some might be, shall we say, under the influence of alcohol, or might be loud voices. And WRS are telling us, well, that will be judged. It's unlikely that would count as statutory noise nuisance. Is that right?
I think so, yes. I think that's what, as I say, what we are saying is the pub will continue as it is at the moment and under the existing licenses until 2 a.m. The door's shut, everyone comes off the terrace at 10 p.m. and the door's shut and no one has access to that terrace or the courtyard after 10 p.m, but the music could continue inside.
Okay, what the thing about the door then, because obviously what we're saying is the door being open is a material factor in causing noise. Is it, as a result of if this were to go through today, are we saying that the door, the conduit for the noise, would be closed at 10 p.m, that there wouldn't be anybody on the terrace either after 10 p.m? But at the moment, the doors can remain open and there could be loud music blaring out until 2.
That condition, and all doors and doors leading to that shall be closed and remain closed after 10 p.m. So I'd add those words, if that's what members want, those words into it for avoidance of doubt. I would also remove the word preserves from the reason. It's just the proposal does not result in undue noise. So there's an additional.
Chairman, with those extra words, that makes a significant difference. Talking about doors will be, is a requirement that doors. Then you're stopping the source of the noise, irrespective of whether there are people on the terrace or not. Locked for safety.
Yeah, first of all, I need to declare that my son owns a house in Britannia Square. It doesn't back on to he's never spoken to me about this, so we've never discussed this, but I need to declare it. So are you happy that I continue? Yeah. As I understand it, I was just looking at 7.6. At the moment, there is an Should this roof terrace be developed, then the doors to the outside, to presumably the courtyard area and the roof terrace, courtyard area. So the doors to the courtyard area and to the roof terrace will be closed at 10 o'clock, so no one can go outside. And people who might go into the courtyard to smoke earlier on in the evening will have to go to the front of the property to smoke. So nobody should 10 o'clock in the evening. Okay, so to me, that seems to be an improvement. Because at the moment, any residents there will hear people talking in the courtyard up till 2 a.m. Whereas if this goes ahead, that should stop at 10 p.m. Am I right in thinking that?
You are right, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you. And the other thing is, we've got on to talking a lot about live music. Is there anything in the report where it says anything about live music? Because nobody seems to have objected to live music being.
Again, Councillor, we haven't. But again, if you want to restrict the outdoor terraces being used for live music at any time, then again, that would be a reasonable planning condition. So again, that is within your powers to add
And I'll call on Lynn.
Thank you. Oh.
Do you want to go first, Lynn?
Thank you. Can you hear me all right? There is a problem with the sound system, I'm afraid. I don't know whether it affects the live stream, but here on Zoom, I've only been able to hear intermittent words. So, you know, my apologies if I'm not connecting fully to everything that's been said. Can someone confirm that you can hear me now? Right, thank you. I'm grateful to officers, you know, for what I think is a very good report, and it certainly, I think, justifies my calling in and the need for this decision to come to planning committee, because it is a very finely balanced planning decision. And as with all planning decisions, it's necessary to weigh the benefits versus the harms. And I think the benefits of this development are actually fairly limited. It's limited to one particular relatively small business. I have great sympathy for them, but you know, they're not exactly an economic powerhouse, and won't be making a huge contribution in terms of employment and economic benefit. The actual physical proposal, let's be honest, is not a thing of great beauty, and won't be adding a great deal to the street scene. I absolutely understand, you know, that pubs are, with COVID, are seeking any opportunity for outside drinking space. And I'm really interested that, you know, within the planning officer view is that is not a material consideration of itself. So Backwalk, I think, has been illustrated by the photos that you see. Now, the pub faces onto a very busy main road, but we're talking about the back of that site, the rear of that site, where there's a very narrow alleyway and is very close on to a variety of residential properties. When this planning application came through, I looked onto the WRS and onto the licensing, or requested the details of the license for the feathers, and actually I was really surprised as to how late it is. So the current the license that they have is for the performance of live music indoors up to midnight every day, late night refreshments up till midnight every day, playing of recorded music up till 1:30 in the morning on Friday, Saturdays and Sundays until midnight during the week, and for the sale of alcohol until 2 a.m. Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Those are really very extensive hours, and to have that within the building is one thing. To open it out into that outside roof space is a very different matter. I'm really sad I couldn't hear most of what Steve Williams was saying. Now, I have enormous respect for regulatory services. I think, no, the proposed structure is not going to be adequate soundproofing of itself. And my experience with, you know, representing the city centre since 2012 and the interplay between the hospitality sector and local residents, to prove nuisance is incredibly difficult. And I think, you know, it's easy. As a layperson, we can predict that there's likely to be a problem. The rules and regulations for regulatory services Now, to prove the fact after the event requires a lot of nuisance to be experienced by residents, for complaints to be made, for monitoring equipment to be set up. That's a pretty tortuous path, and actually, you know, set with misery, if I'm honest. Whereas, you know, before planning, you have the ability to prevent that scenario and that conflict between business and residents arising. I think, you know, the advice from the crime risk manager, you know, they have the expertise and they're aware of difficulties with how antisocial behaviour arises and how that can affect residents. No, the recommend, ideally, you know, we are asking that, I think, with the balance of this planning application, I would ask colleagues to refuse it. If you are minded to approve, I think a planning condition on the premises to prevent any outdoor activity after 10 o'clock would be, in a way, it's the only way that I think this application, this development could be considered as acceptable. But I think there isn't enormous benefit from agreeing to the development, and I hope that it might be refused today. Thank you.
Can you hear me, Lynn?
Yeah, I heard that.
Condition 3, if it is approved, says all outdoor space associated with the public house, including the roof terrace and the external courtyard, shall not be available to be used by patrons or customers after 10 o'clock on any given day, which contains the noise within the building and out onto the...
That is extremely helpful. I guess my only concern is that to enforcement of planning conditions is maybe more challenging than, or harder to achieve than enforcement of licensing conditions from experience.
I would expect residents will go out with a camera and take a picture of an open door beyond 10 o'clock. Questions, comments? Owen, and then...
I want to agree with a lot of what Councillor Hodges just said, that this appears to be an improvement on the current situation to me. But I want to make 2 points. The first one, I've just looked at Google Maps of this area, and directly behind the feathers, there doesn't appear to be any houses on the other side of that wall anyway. Looks to me like there's a huge wooded area, or at least there is on Google Maps. But secondly, I am concerned that in the middle of the summer at 10 o'clock, when it's still light, the idea that this door is not going to be open for someone to go out and have a fag or a pint, I do find that a bit strange, and it would be difficult to enforce, because in the middle of the summer, it's still light at 10 o'clock.
Thank you, Chair. The first question I'd like to ask is about a rear fire exit. Is there one going through the lower outdoor space?
Yes, is the short answer. I would imagine that that's part of licensing arrangements that fire details would need to be agreed.
Right, so on the back of that, presumably the back gate, as shown in the diagram, is also open for people to go in and out of.
Again, I don't know, Councillor, but it can be opened, obviously, onto back walk, yes.
Thank you. Right, the second thing is about the height of the proposed wall on the roof terrace, which the objector suggested might be as low as 2'6", and that above it would be a trellis. If this is going to be approved in any way, obviously that is insufficient on health and safety grounds, but also maybe we could, if it is going to happen, as well as increasing the height of that wall, is there are various baffle materials available, and then that could be hidden by the greenery placed on top. So it'd still be pretty, or, well, it depends on your point of view about artificial foliage, but you could actually hide baffling under the leaves to improve the sound quality for local neighbours. So if we are going to go for it, I'd like a solid wall with baffling behind any greenery.
Again, Councillor, that would be changing the scope of the application because there's no wall proposed or no extension to the wall proposed. So if that is fundamental to you accepting the application, then we would have to say to you that would be you can't change the scope of the physical works through the decision, Councillor.
But I'm assuming that if it is granted in its current form, it would have to meet building regs and be safe, which means it's got to be a reasonably solid structure with a reasonably high level, otherwise you can fall off it. Right there, right.
I'd just like to say that putting a wall around it would, it might be good, especially with some, insulation material, but you've got an open top on it. So it's not going to make a lot of difference, especially for the residents of the house to the north with the gable end window. It would make no difference to them at all, and they're the closest sensitive receptors.
Thank you. Pat?
Thank you. I mean, the safety of the railings or trellis has already been mentioned. There is one other rather non-planning issue that I'd like to mention, if that's all right. It's a pity the developer or agent or whoever isn't here, because there is a safety issue, isn't there, that people might either fall off the top or they might drop something off onto people on the walkway below. And you've mentioned yourself, Chair, that you think that's more of an insurance issue than anything else. And it certainly would be. I'd be a bit worried about walking under that at night, just in case. It's not a planning matter, of course, but I hope that the owner or developer will take that on board. Otherwise, it's difficult to see what to do about this. I think I'm going to have to say it's okay.
Bill? No. Councillor Amos.
Well, it was just clarification, Mr. Chairman, on the enforcement. I mean, it seems as though planning enforcement will be responsible for the 10 o'clock, but WRS is responsible for the noise. And I can foresee difficulties in both circumstances. Who do people complain to? And the other point I would make, which I've just really thought about during the debate, you could argue caveat emptor, couldn't you? If you live next to a pub, can you expect peace and quiet? I mean, I just posed the question.
Again, that is part of the material consideration, Councillor, is you take account of the existing situations that is there, so to speak. You don't buy a flat or a house in the city centre expecting suburban or countryside quality of life, and I think that has been argued within the courts. Yeah. That is a reasonable assessment. Obviously, the difference is obviously you then have to apply your planning judgment. Has the impact of the development gone beyond boundaries of acceptability? And that is where the planning judgment comes in. If it came, again, I would expect the enforcement to come in to one or both of us and for either Reg Services or ourselves to liaise with each other. I would expect if there was a breach of the planning conditions, then we would obviously use our planning powers accordingly.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that although what Councillor Amos has said is right, or whoever said that, yeah, you live in the city centre next to a pub, you've got to expect a bit of disturbance occasionally. But what's happening here is that you're creating a new noise source, potentially a new noise source. It's not the existing operations of the pub. It's new. So when people move in, you expect what you've got, and you perhaps don't expect to have another area on top of noise, music noise emanating from the place. And so there is a bit of a little difference, really, in the creation of a new noise source.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think that Steve's just answered the question I asked him earlier. What we're doing is adding the noise, and I expected him to give me that sort of scenario, but it just occurred that if you live next to a pub, you accept some sort of nuisance among your neighbours or side, but that doesn't give us the right to add that to the made. So I'm not comfortable with this. I think I'll be inclined to say no. The Chairman, I think we've managed to find that there was no complaint, so there must have been somebody who's going out to smoke is a different kettle of fish than if you're allowing doors to be open before 10, to be used above the terrace. That's what if it was 6 o'clock, I could probably go along with your sentiments, but I don't see that. I think it's just adding the prolonging problem that they're possibly not seen before. Maybe somebody's just going to have a cigarette casually, which is different to having in and out people, mingle with their friends who are outside on the terrace.
Mel?
Thank you. I don't like this application, and not because I just don't like it for planning reasons. Obviously, it's in the Foregate Street, the Tiding, which is a conservation area, and we're looking to sort of implement a terrace roof with astroturf essentially, and the Conservation Advisory Panel have said that it's not acceptable. Noise WRS are here, and they said that the residents could be adversely affected. West Mercia, although we're suggesting conditions which I don't believe will be upheld, have said they're concerned over the hours of its opening. And we talk about the principle of development and it being in the city centre. Well, perhaps I don't know how it's technically drawn up, but to me, the Tiding in that area isn't the city centre. It's very different to if you were in New Street or that sort of area, or by McDonald's or anywhere around there. So to me, I don't understand why it's referred to as city centre. That's all. Thank you.
Marjorie?
I'd just like to draw people's attention to the fact that, and again, this is related to the fact that this development is in a conservation area, that it's not a high quality development. And we know that the roof is plastic. It seems that the planting might be plastic as well. And I can imagine that in 10 years' time, it could all look really tatty and won't actually enhance that particular setting, which is, a setting of some interest. And I wonder if there's grounds there for refusal on account of the fact that we'll be going against development plan policies SWDP 6 and 24, seek to protect and enhance designated and non-designated heritage assets. Thank you.
Joe.
Can I move this, please? Because we've talked about it quite a lot, and I'd like to move the proposal, please.
Move for approval. Yep. Anybody? Do you want any other?
Sorry, just for clarity, the additional condition was to, we proposed that we added in, and the door leading to the external area should be closed into condition 3. And there was also a discussion of whether or not we wanted an additional condition stating there should be no live or amplified music on the external terrace at all as an additional condition. So those are the additional conditions that have been talked about. So you would need to say to me, you want those conditions, and I'll agree those precise wordings with the chair.
Okay. So we've got a proposer. Anybody wish to second that? Oh, sorry, Pat, I didn't realise.
I was going to make history, Mr. Chairman, seconding for Councillor Hodges.
So we have a proposer and 2 seconders.
Thank you, Chair. As it's in this case, because we're going to add additional conditions, we'll delegate authorities to the Corporate Director of Planning and Governance, subject to consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair, to agree the final wording of the conditions and issue the decision. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those against? 2, 3. Motion's been carried, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Nine. Only 2 left. I mean, I think I'm getting a betterment out of it. Gentlemen.
42, slide 42.
Can I call you to order, and let's move on. We are on to agenda item 9, page 103. Gentlemen.
Thank you, councillors. This is an application for outline planning permission. Sorry. Thank you. So, yeah, this is an outline application for up to 24 affordable, all affordable dwellings, with access only being considered as the reserved matter. That means that the layout, as shown within the report, is indicative, and matters such as scale, layout, appearance, and landscaping are to be considered at a later stage. There is an indicative mix, which is 11 units of 11 units, which are 1-bed, 2-person apartments, 3 units, 2-bed, 4-person apartments, 2 units of 1-bed, 2-person house, 5 units of 3-bed, 4-person houses, 2 units of 3-bed, 5-person houses, and 1 unit of 4-bed, 6-person houses. Again, all matters are considered in the report, so we'll just go through quickly. So the next slide, please, sorry. This is the application site, currently outlined in red there. The next slide, thank you. So again, the site is being used at the moment for employment uses, but it's surrounded by residential uses. Again, you can see the fencing at the moment. Next slide, please. Again, next, some more of the existing buildings. Next slide. Again, the existing access point down to Brickfields Road. Slide, please. Yeah, this is the access onto Brickfields Road at the moment. Next slide. Again, some of the existing industrial buildings. Slide. Again, looking out towards some of the residential properties and how close they are to the neighbouring boundary, to the boundary of the industrial processes and commercial uses. Again, showing the accesses and arrangements onto, sorry, next slide, sorry. This again shows the access. Again, next slide. Keep scrolling through, thank you. Again, just again showing all the existing buildings for the site. Again, existing buildings. Okay, right, so this is the indicative layout that we had, that's been submitted. Again, central courtyard for car parking to apartments would be the principals, the houses there at the northern end of the site, and again, anticipated thing. And again, this is the showing how the proposed visibility displays for the access work, as access, as I say, is onto Brickfields Road is the only point we are considering in detail. And that is it, councillors. As I say, nothing to add to the report, and all matters have been considered within there. Happy to take any questions, councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a windfall site, so it's not one we were really necessarily expecting to have come forward. Lovely though, you know, we're looking at a site that's kind of a tired industrial site, which could become housing, and much needed housing. And it looks like we will get a very good housing mix for our purposes. It's saying that it will provide 80% of social rent or intermediate rent, which we badly need. So that's all good. And we have noise mitigation proposed, and an acoustic fence is going to be put up, so it shouldn't annoy the neighbours too much. And the neighbours haven't made any objections anyway at the moment, as far as I can tell. So I think this building houses here actually might be rather better for the area than has previously been, you know. And there might be a bit of contamination, so we'll have to look out for that. I'm sure regulatory services will be onto that. Other than that, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't do it, apart from possibly the parking issues, and I'd really like to hear a bit of detail on that.
Leave after this item. Yes, well, as you will have heard from within the officer's report, all that is being for consideration, all is for consideration today is the access. Obviously, there's an indicative layout that has been provided, and we have already let the applicant know that the indicative layout, should that be what is submitted for any reserve matters, would not be acceptable to us. In particular, there are areas of concerns in relation to car parking. This is indicative and not for consideration now, but we have let them know that it will need to comply fully with adopted streetscape design guide when it does come forward.
Thank you. So because it's an outline planning permission, it's not an immediate concern.
Go.
Thank you. This is in my ward. It's a sort of tired site, really, although it has provided some employment. I'm sorry to see the loss of employment land, but I think this is a very good use of this windfall site. It does provide badly needed housing, and I noticed that 80% of the housing will be social rent or intermediate rent, which is really good. And I just think it's a good use of land which is next to residential areas. There have been no residents who've objected to this, and it's a win-win situation.
Thank you. Can I ask a question? Page 109, it says the proposal is considered to not fully comply with the marketing requirements, SWP 8 Part F. A big stumbling block? What does that actually mean?
Commonly, council, when you lose employment land, we require a marketing exercise to show that it can't be used for employment, continue to be used for employment uses. So it hasn't fulfilled all those criteria that are within that policy, but they have submitted a marketing assessment, an employment assessment It's the timescale, in effect, that they haven't gone through. It's usually 12 or 18 months we asked for, so they haven't done the full 12 months, but it's clear that there's nobody there who would continue to take that on. Well, it's on the short, I think, coming to the end of its lease. But as stated, it's not a safeguarded employment site. It is one where that planning bounds, and obviously, given the MPPF is to significantly boost housing land supply, we are of the view that the housing is an appropriate use on this site.
Councillor Amos.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no objections to this application, but just subject to one thing which I'd like a bit more certainty on, which is paragraph 7.26 about the parking. It says, and Ms. Hanshaw has just spoken about it, may be necessary to reduce the number of proposed dwellings to achieve adequate parking in line with standards. May be necessary. That's what bothers me. Clearly, if any application comes forward is in accordance with the parking, then I would obviously wouldn't have any objections to it. But I'm just a bit concerned that it doesn't then come back and say that, well, you know, we're going to have to reduce the parking so it's not consistent in order to get the 24. And then we say, oh, well, you know, affordable housing, we've got to have it, sod the parking. Sorry, never mind the parking. You know, and that's what bothers me, that it's got to come back for that ratification. If that were a definite statement contained within this report that we're going to vote on, I'd be happy to vote for it. So could we just clarify what the status of that is? I say I'm concerned that it comes back and they insist on 24, and then the give would have to be inadequate parking, and then highways will object, and then, you know, then where are we? So it's not really satisfactory to leave it, I think, up in the air to that extent.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, as stated in the report, and it's an indicative mix, we are using that as a basis for that. Again, it would maybe other things they might need to move things around. I think, again, layout is, and it's difficult to say without the layout coming forward in a detailed manner. So, and as that is a reserve matter, we couldn't justify a refusal. We can see that they can fit 24-ish on site, as I say, but it might need, I've seen outline applications before come with less houses. I've seen them come with more, obviously, as well. But, you know, as I say, it might be that they need to go up a story to reduce the footprint and therefore increase the space available for parking. That again is a detailed consideration of scale. So that would be again a reserve matter. But again, these are negotiations with the applicant through the reserve matters.
So reserve matters were dealt with by officers, is that, or would it come back to committee?
It's a major application, Councillor, so it come to committee.
I propose, Chair, given that we can't decide the parking issue today, propose a recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. The proposal is as set out in the officer's report. All those in favour? 3, 4, 5. And that's approved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. This is application 21/00840/REM. Just wait for the slide to come up. Thank you. It's Unit 7, Shrub Hill Retail Park. A very long-winded development description. Basically, what it is varying the existing planning controls on the site to allow, in effect, farm foods, but food retail to be used within the former Staples/Office World building. Go to the next slide, please. Application, the unit outlined in red. Next slide, please. That's the building, vacant as it is on the existing retail park. Again, more photos. Again, the retail parks, views of the retail park and car parking. Sorry. Next slide, please. Next slide. They are what picture says 1,000 words, as they say. That's the presentation, councillors. It's a vacant retail unit being asked to be reused and being brought back into use. The report is as set out and it's recommended for approval for the reasons at section 9 and subject to the plan conditions as set out.
Councillor Amos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, without wishing to preempt the committee, this seems a very sensible open and shut case, and I would move that we proceed.
Propose? Seconder? Oh, let's have a question before the second.
It says at the moment that the proposed variation is to meet the requirements of a farm foods which specialises in frozen food. But that doesn't mean to say that in the future other foods couldn't be sold from there. You know, that may be what it's intended for now. But it could become a sort of mini, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, that sells food like Tesco.
Lidl, Aldi.
Yeah, that's a supermarket.
Iceland, Waitrose.
Yeah. I'm not saying that I would have necessarily object to that, because this building's been empty for so long and it desperately needs something to go in there. But it doesn't mean that it will only ever be frozen foods. It could become another little supermarket. But yeah, that's no objection.
The city centre master plan has got this designated medium term for residential. And if we give permission now, I worry that it means that that area of the master plan will be put on hold for a number of years. This is a prime site along the canal, which is crying out to be loved and to be put to really good use. And we're just going to put a freezer shop in there. And I just worry that we're doing ourselves down, and it'll be difficult then to reinstate the master plan for the area to make it a beautiful area with public realm as was intended.
If I remember rightly, it goes back to, I think, my first or second year on council. This was designated because there was a hope that the bus garage would move out of town. I really can't see an issue with the frontage that goes opposite the Asda car park becoming housing, if that be the case. But the reality is somebody granted planning permission for this to be a warehouse superstore. I'm not sure I'm going to see a landlord who's then going to be prepared to knock it down. And would we be prepared to buy it back, I guess, would be the question. Serious about it. Yeah.
Now, I do realise that at the moment it's vacant and serves no useful purpose, but I do think it's worth considering that we do have aspirations for that site.
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to second that, Chairman. I'm very grateful that somebody is coming along and uses that site. Derelict it is currently, so bringing it back to life is well used.
Chair, thank you. This probably sounds obvious, but I just want to check it doesn't disagree. Obviously, we've got a lot of fund in the town's fund, etc., and a lot of plans for the city, but this isn't going to interrupt or damage any of those plans.
No, Councillor, we are aware that the economic development team are working very hard to secure a wide range of improvements, but it's not going to harm those ones. It should also be noted that the city centre master plan, whilst adopted by the council, is not adopted the planning document. It's a material consideration, of course, but it's not a planning document. Owen?
I was going to say that I could see Councillor Barnes's point about this being residential, but it's been empty for a long time, and we might have to wait another 5 years before a residential application comes forward. And land like this shouldn't be left unused. So I'm more than happy to go with this.
Thank you, Chair. All those in favour of the recommendation which is set out in the report? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And those against? And any abstentions? Motion's carried. Thank you, Chair.